Hello everyone. So our topic for today is going to be about detection of life outside Earth. It might seem a bit off reality, let's say. So how come we have all sorts of problems down here on Earth and we're speaking about things outside Earth or extraterrestrially? But I think if we understand this topic abstractly enough, we can actually lay some foundations that can actually help us within the context of Earth. So I think if we look at it from a limited perspective, it is actually outside the domain of Earth, let's say. But if we look at it abstractly enough and try to understand the probabilities that weigh into this kind of topic, we kind of could actually apply it in a whole variety of contexts. And to add to the last point, I think from a practical perspective, thinking about detection of life outside Earth makes us reason about probabilities much more clearly, let's say, because we're not really operating within the domain of our experiences. So when we deal with things that are in Earth, let's say, we kind of have intuitions merged within those probabilities. But when it comes to things that are outside the domain of our experiences, we can kind of reason about probabilities much more clearly, let's say, and think about it from a different angle. So this is one example of actually applying the context of an extraterrestrial reasoning or extraterrestrial topic to a context of things on Earth, let's say. So we started off the blog post by mentioning the definition of life, and I think a lot of people have a kind of intuitive approach towards the definition of life, because usually when we see something that's alive down here on Earth, we can actually detect if it's alive or not. But the reason for that is because we witness the process of it going through different phases, so we deem it as alive. But when it comes to extraterrestrial context, we can't really see the process. We'd have to take it in isolation and see if it's alive or not at that moment. But when it comes to interterrestrial, let's say life, we usually see the process of those beings and we deem it as alive. So that's why the definition of life is pretty important when it comes to extraterrestrial life. So having said this, without delving into the theoretical definition of life, which we mentioned in the defining life paragraph, in order for us to detect extraterrestrial life, we can skip this part in some sense and go to the practical definition of life, which is what assembly theory, which is a theory we mentioned, gives us in principle. So the idea of assembly theory is to check if a chemical molecule has some kind of memory. So if we take a molecule, break it up, and then rebuild it again, if it could be rebuilt with 5 steps, then it probably doesn't have a memory, basically. But if we break a molecule and then we'd have to rebuild it with 17, 18 steps, then we can probably infer that this molecule had some kind of memory, which is to say genes, for example. So this is what assembly theory does in principle. It gives us some kind of probabilistic correlation within the number of steps that a molecule has been made with and its liveliness, let's say. Now, 2 more points to clarify. First is when we say life, we don't really mean life only from a macro level, but also from a micro level, things like bacteria and fungi and all the things we can't see with our eyes. So from that perspective, it's important to have a universal detection mechanism of life in order for us to investigate the matter properly, let's say. Now, the second point I wanted to mention is with regards to assembly theory. When it comes to assembly theory, if we're trying to investigate a thing as alive or not, we're basically going to take a small sample of it, and then by that small sample, we're going to deem it as alive or not, or probabilistically alive or not, to be specific. So if we try to give an example of this, if we take a sample of a bacterium, we're not going to investigate the whole bacterium, let's say, or the whole constituents of the bacterium. We're going to take a very small protein, let's say, inside a cell of the bacterium, and then we're going to break it apart, rebuild it again. If the steps are large enough, then we can infer that this specific protein came from an alive being, let's say. So this is the idea of assembly theory. It takes a very small sample or constituent, and then it probabilistically infers if that thing is alive or not. So to extend upon assembly theory, As soon as assembly theory left the realm of biology and went right straight to the realm of chemistry, there must be some kind of limitations or sacrifices towards that approach. And one example of this limitation, let's say, is the inability of assembly theory to actually distinguish between technologically made things and biological things. So both of those things, as we mentioned, have some kind of memory. So when we look at technologically made things, they actually have been made by humans, for example, and those humans by extension have memories. And when we go to biological entities, those entities have genes, which we can think of kind of as memories that built up those molecules. So this is one limitation with regards to assembly theory, being able to distinguish between technologically made things and biological entities. And one other thing to mention is when we say life outside Earth, we don't really mean necessarily intelligent life. But what we're talking about is the broad scheme of life. And that's why we actually left the realm of biology and went right straight to chemistry, because we might not know what the structures of extraterrestrial life is. So if we go on with a biological approach or approach within the realm of biology, we would have to assume cells, we'd have to assume enzymes, all those things. But once we go to the chemical or chemistry aspect, we don't really need all those assumptions, so we can dispose of them. But as we mentioned, this approach also has limitations. So another aspect of the detection of life outside Earth would be the controversial UFOs, or unidentified flying objects. So those are usually phenomena or objects that have been seen in the sky by different people, which cannot be identified. Now, the interesting aspect of it is that it's kind of relative. So it depends on the person who's seeing it. So maybe if I see a really quick airplane, I would say it's a UFO for me, for example. So we have to understand the context of UFOs in the sense that it's kind of relative. But there is another interesting aspect of it, which the French government has actually done an investigation about this. And they deemed around 3.3% of the unidentified objects reported by people as unknown. So they investigated the whole thing, they asked people everything, but they can't really tell what it is. And this is one important, let's say, aspect of the UFO phenomena, in the sense that it gives us some kind of probability that this might be an extraterrestrial intelligent life, let's say. This is a very interesting topic in the sense that it reminds us that we actually need a detection mechanism of life in order for us to detect it in the first place, whether it's in Mars or in other planets in the future. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope you find this video beneficial, and see you next time.